Tomatoes are well known as a perfect crop for the beginner gardener as they are relatively easy to grow. This doesn't mean that they don't come without their problems though, and one of those problems which we're going to be talking about in today's video is the dreaded blossom end rot, a big problem amongst many gardeners and a very common problem, a problem which I've had a problem with many times. And we're going to be going over 3 reasons why blossom end rot may be occurring, and we're also going to address some common myths as well surrounding blossom end rot. But firstly, what actually is blossom end rot? Blossom end rot is a rotten area on the blossom end of the tomato where the flower once was, and it's actually caused by the cell walls in the tomato rupturing, and this is what causes this horrible rotten mushy part on the blossom end of the tomato. And this can also affect aubergines, peppers and squashes as well. It's not just tomatoes, but tomatoes are one of the worst affected crops. So there are actually 3 main reasons for your blossom end rot. And the first reason is going to be inconsistent watering, and this is probably the most common reason why you may be having blossom end rot. And it's a common misconception amongst many gardeners that blossom end rot is purely a result of a lack of calcium in the soil. And this is kind of true, but it's not always a result of lack of calcium in the soil. It's actually usually, in most cases, a result of inconsistent watering, either watering too much or not watering enough. You can add as many calcium containing things as much as you like, but it's not going to fix your blossom end rot problem if you have a problem with your soil moisture levels. If your watering is inconsistent, then you're still going to have a problem with blossom end rot. It's actually caused by the plant's inability to access the calcium in the soil. So either the soil dries out, which causes the roots to dry out and die off, or you give them too much water, you overwater them, and then the roots start to rot and die off. So both of these things inhibits the plant's ability to access the calcium in the soil via the roots, because the roots are either rotting or drying and dying off. This is especially a problem if you're growing in containers like I am here, because the soil can dry out very quickly in containers. And sometimes I forget to water my tomato plants. Sometimes I can't make it down to the plot because I'm busy at home or something. And it has happened where I've come down to the plot and I've seen a couple of my tomato plants in containers wilting, and straight away in my mind I think, oh no, blossom end rot. I already know that I'm going to have a problem with it once I see them tomato plants wilting. And actually a couple of my tomato plants at the back here have already had a problem with blossom end rot. So don't worry, everybody has a problem with blossom end rot at some point. It's actually a very common problem. But I picked these fruits off and it is now growing fine, and there is actually quite a lot of fruits on there doing fine with no signs of blossom end rot. So all I did was made sure that I was watering consistently thereafter, and the problem has fixed itself. When growing your tomatoes in the container especially, apply a mulch such as straw, wood chip, grass clippings, or it could be many other things. But by doing this, you're going to help the soil contain the moisture, so it's not going to dry out anywhere near as fast. Ensure that the tomato has a big enough container. I like to grow them in these 30 litre buckets here, but anywhere from 20 to 30 litres or more is sufficient. If your container is too small, then obviously it's going to dry out very fast. I say the bigger the better really. And make sure you keep an eye on those weeds as well. Any weeds that are in with your tomato plants are not only going to be competing for nutrients, but they're also going to be competing for water as well. Perhaps your soil is too well draining, perhaps there's too much sand in it, in which case the moisture is going to drain out through that container very quickly. And nutrients are also going to leach out much more quickly as well. Now, tomato plants require around 2 to 3 inches of water per week, and even more when it's hot and when they're fruiting like this. So what I like to do is I like to go in with my watering can and I will add around an inch of water, so there's a good pool of it on the top of the soil, and then I will go away for a minute and water the rest of my pots while I'm waiting. And then once a minute has passed, I will go back again with another inch of water. And what this will do is, this will ensure that all that water has well and truly soaked down into the soil and all the way through, so there's no dry areas of soil in that pot. So I know that this tomato plant has had a good water. Organic matter such as compost and things like sphagnum peat moss and coconut coir can be added to your soil to improve its moisture retentive abilities. So if your soil is too sandy, then add some of these things which will help improve its ability to hold onto moisture. But of course, it is important not to overwater our tomato plants. I like to do a thing where I stick my index finger into the soil up to my second knuckle, and when I bring my finger back out again, if the soil has very easily stuck to my finger and it generally feels moist, then there's no need to water. Whereas if it feels dry and not much soil is sticking to my finger, then that is a good indicator to me that I need to water. Your soil may be holding too much moisture. Perhaps it's not well draining enough, in which case you may add some crockery towards the bottom of the pot to help with drainage. You could also incorporate a little bit of horticultural sand into your soil as well. And it's also important to remember to have some drainage holes in the bottom of your container. Now, another reason for your blossom end rot, our second reason, could be wrong soil pH. Tomatoes prefer a soil pH between 6.5 and 7.5. And if the pH is not right and it doesn't sit in that range, the plant can have trouble accessing nutrients in the soil. And one of these nutrients is calcium. And you can take your soil pH by getting a tester kit, or you could get a soil water pH meter. This is also good for measuring soil moisture as well. So if you find that your pH isn't right, you can add amendments as necessary to adjust it. Now, the third reason which you may have blossom end rot could simply be a lack of calcium in the soil. Now, this is the most unlikely cause, but this is more likely to be a problem if you're using old compost, or if you're growing in the open ground outside which has had crops growing in it in previous years. So your soil may just be tired and be lacking nutrients. So if you're absolutely sure that your soil moisture is consistent and your pH is right, then it may well just be a lack of calcium in the soil. So adding things such as eggshells, but bear in mind you do have to wait for this to break down. The calcium isn't going to be available straight away. And adding things such as bone meal, bloodfish and bone, adding things such as garden lime will help raise calcium levels. But do bear in mind that garden lime is going to raise the alkalinity of your soil. So you do have to watch how much you're adding. But for a more immediate effect, adding a calcium containing liquid feed is going to provide us with almost instantaneous results, and it's going to fix the problem very, very quickly. And I can think of one tomato feed which is good. In fact, a lot of these tomato feeds will contain some calcium. I use Levington's Tomarite, and that contains a little bit of calcium. So you can actually leave these tomatoes with blossom end rot to ripen if the blossom end rot isn't too bad. You know, like this, just a little bit, then it's fine. You know, you can actually cut this off. The rest of the tomato is going to be fine to eat. And you can compost these as well. It's not a disease, it's not a bacterial infection or anything like that. It's simply just the fruit rotting. So to conclude, the most common cause of blossom end rot in tomatoes is inconsistent watering, either watering too much or not watering enough. So by ensuring that your soil moisture is consistent and you're doing the things in order to ensure that your soil does not dry out too much, and you're ensuring that you're not watering too much, then you're going to significantly reduce your risk of blossom end rot. And if it's not this, it could well be wrong soil pH, where the plant is unable to access the calcium in the soil, because wrong soil pH inhibits the plant's ability to access nutrients in the soil. And if it's not those two things, it may well be, on the off chance, that your soil is simply lacking calcium, which is usually more of an issue or more of a thing if your soil is old. And by implementing these things which I've talked about, if you do fix the problem, it is possible for your plant to grow on and still produce a good crop. Like this tomato plant behind me here had a big problem with quite a few of the tomatoes having blossom end rot earlier in the season. And what I did is I corrected my watering. I made sure I wasn't watering too much, and I was watering just enough, and now the plant has recovered and is producing a good amount of good quality fruits. So do not despair. If you do see your tomatoes have some blossom end rot, either let them ripen and then cut off the bad parts, or just cut them off, and your plant can still produce a good crop if you do fix the problem. So I hope I helped you sort out your blossom end rot problem. If I did and you enjoyed the video, then please hit that like button, because it really does help out a lot. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel so you can see when I upload new content just like this. And I hope to see you in the next one. Remember, stay safe, happy gardening, and enjoy it no matter the weather.